The family that raised you was built on lies, and your very existence was the threat they tried to erase. Madison Carter was cast out, labeled an outcast in her own bloodline. But when a cryptic letter and a dying man's confession pull her back into the family's orbit, she uncovers a legacy of betrayal, hidden truths, and stolen identity. As secrets unravel, Madison must choose between vengeance and redemption. This is a story of blood, betrayal, and the woman who came back to reclaim her name. Welcome to the reclamation. I was halfway through reviewing a client's retirement portfolio when the text came in. You'll be at the house by 3 p.m. sharp. No excuses. No greeting, no context. Just a declaration from Patricia Carter that pierced straight through my day. My mother had never understood the difference between a request and a command, and after 36 years I'd stopped hoping she ever would. Outside the window of my downtown Chicago office, the gray March sky stretched endless and heavy. I stared at the message, rereading it, not for clarity, but for confirmation of what I already knew. Something was wrong, again. Behind me, Veronica tapped lightly on the glass wall before letting herself in. "Another Carter crisis?" she asked, setting her coffee down and perching on the edge of my desk. I turned the phone screen toward her without a word. She didn't need more. She'd been around long enough to translate the Carter family code. Let me guess. Tyler did something stupid. Again. "No bet," I muttered, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Veronica blew out a breath and shook her head. "So what is it this time? A failed crypto startup? Third marriage already circling the drain, or another misunderstanding with the IRS?" "I don't know," I said, although a familiar tension was blooming in my chest. But they never use words like important matters unless they've already decided who's paying for them. "You." "Exactly." I could already picture it. The grand living room of the house I grew up in, timelessly furnished in muted beiges and stiff with formality. My father, Donald Carter, seated like some old-world patriarch in his armchair. My mother, perfectly composed in cashmere and pearls, steering the conversation with saccharine manipulation. And Tyler, lounging on the sofa like the prodigal prince whose debts were once again someone else's responsibility. I turned back to my screen, but the numbers blurred. My mind had slipped into a rhythm I knew too well, mapping possibilities, rehearsing responses, bracing for guilt. It had been 18 months since Grandma Gloria passed. 18 months since I'd sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand while she whispered assurances and gave me strength to do what I knew she'd been preparing me for my whole life. In those months, the estate had moved slowly through probate. There were stipulations, complexities, and a great deal of silence from my parents. Until now. I opened the locked cabinet beneath my desk and pulled out the folder I kept separate from my business files. It was labeled simply Legacy. Inside were copies of Gloria's most recent will, trust documents, notarized letters, even a list in her own elegant script titled Assets to be preserved at all costs. I traced my finger along the edge of that paper. The Vermont house, the investment accounts, the heirloom jewelry passed down through 4 generations of women. Things she didn't just give me. They were entrusted. "You don't think they'd try anything now?" Veronica said, watching me closely. "Not with probate so close to closing. I think they've already tried," I said quietly, because something in the tone of my mother's message wasn't just commanding. It was desperate. And desperation in the Carter family always came wrapped in charm and sealed with a lie. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. "They want a meeting? Fine, let's give them one." Veronica arched a brow. "You're not going to warn them?" "No," I said, already opening my calendar to block out Saturday afternoon. "I want to see what they say when they think I'm still in the dark." Her smile was slow and sharp. "So, we're playing chess now?" "We always were." I replied, standing to retrieve another file. He just assumed I was the pawn. Saturday arrived cloaked in gray, as if even the sky knew better than to shine over a Carter family gathering. The drive to Oak Park felt longer than usual, the silence in my car filled with the ghosts of old conversations I never wanted to replay. Report cards shrugged off, accomplishments minimized, and endless variations of the phrase, "Your brother needs you." The colonial-style house stood at the end of a tree-lined street like it always had, pristine, symmetrical, and cold. It was the kind of place people admired from the outside, never knowing how much damage could hide behind leaded glass windows and curated flower beds. I parked behind Tyler's brand new Audi, which seemed ironic given the rumors about his mounting debts. Maybe it wasn't irony, maybe it was just entitlement, inherited and honed. The heavy oak door opened before I could knock. My mother appeared, perfectly styled in her signature powder blue cardigan set, lips painted in a soft coral that never moved even when she smiled with intent. "Madison, finally, you're just in time," she chirped, stepping aside to let me in. The scent of Chanel No. 5 clung to her like armor. Inside, the house looked unchanged, still museum clean, still curated to suggest prosperity without intimacy. My father sat in his usual leather armchair, glasses low on his nose, pretending to be lost in a folder of documents that he had clearly been reviewing for my benefit. Tyler was sprawled on the sofa, his posture lazy, his expression guarded. "Drink?" my father asked, gesturing toward the bar cart. I declined with a shake of the head and chose the armchair directly across from them. Both symbolically and strategically distant, we exchanged hollow pleasantries. Patricia offered updates on the neighbors I didn't care about, and upcoming events I wasn't invited to. It was all part of the script: set the stage, feign warmth, lull the target. But this time I wasn't waiting for my cue. Donald cleared his throat, the cue shifting. "Madison, we've asked you here to discuss something important regarding the family estate." I offered him a cool nod, letting him continue. "As you know," he went on, "with the final probate process nearing completion, we feel it's time to discuss a more cohesive plan for managing your grandmother's legacy." There it was. He made it sound like a team decision, like we were all equal players in some benevolent mission to honor Gloria's memory. But I knew better. I said nothing. Patricia picked up where he left off. "We've drafted a proposal for a family trust. It consolidates all remaining assets under a single entity. Donald and I would serve as trustees, of course, with the goal of preserving and distributing the estate in a way that serves the entire family." She slid a folder toward me across the table. I didn't touch it. "We've included plans for the Vermont property, the investment accounts, even the heirlooms," Donald added. "And of course, helping Tyler resolve a few recent financial setbacks would be the first priority." There it was again. The unspoken code for gambling debts, bad decisions, and shady IOUs. Tyler looked up briefly, then back down at the glass in his hand. "I see," I said evenly. Donald leaned forward. "It's what your grandmother would have wanted, Madison, to take care of the family, to keep it together." I met his gaze without flinching. "Is that what she told you?" Silence stretched. Patricia's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "I'm sure we can all agree," she said, voice tightening, "that Gloria wouldn't have wanted her legacy to cause division. She was a woman of unity. She was also a woman of foresight," I replied. "She knew exactly what she was doing when she named me the primary beneficiary." Tyler let out a sharp breath. "Come on, Madison. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I finally reached for the folder, flipped it open, and scanned the contents. It was exactly what I expected. Thinly veiled appropriation disguised as unity. Control dressed in concern. I closed it. "You've already spoken to another attorney about contesting the will, haven't you?" Donald's mouth tensed. Patricia's smile faltered. "We're just trying to do what's best for the family," he said. I stood. "So am I. Tyler's voice cracked across the room. "If I get hurt, it's on you." I stared at him, then at both of my parents. "You should have thought about that before assuming I'd let you steal from me." Then I turned and walked out, leaving their silence behind like a closing door. They wanted a meeting, they got one, but not the outcome they had scripted. Not this time. The Vermont house always had a stillness to it, like it was holding its breath. I hadn't set foot there since the funeral. It wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I wasn't ready. But on Sunday morning, I flew in alone and let myself in with the brass key that still hung on my chain. The air inside was sharp with age and faint lavender, the exact scent of my grandmother Gloria's scarf drawer. The house had been built in 1897. Whitewashed wood, creaky staircases, crown molding that wrapped around every doorway like quiet arms. It was a place that held generations of stories, but more importantly, it held her. Her presence clung to the corners of every room. Her voice, calm and firm, still lived in the way the kitchen was organized, and how the journals on the desk were stacked just so. Upstairs, in the third-floor attic she used as an office, I found what I was looking for. A dark cherry wood box tucked behind the bookshelf, right where she told me she'd leave it. I opened it gently, half expecting her hand to reach over mine from the grave. Inside was a neat bundle of letters, all tied with a blue ribbon and a flash drive labeled in her elegant script. "Private, for Madison only." My chest tightened. I sank into her old reading chair, its cushions sagging in a familiar way, and began to read. The first letter was dated 2 years before she died. "Dearest Madison, if you're reading this, then the moment I've spent years preparing for has finally arrived. You were never just my granddaughter. You were my legacy, and legacies must be protected not just from outsiders, but sometimes from within." I stopped and stared at the ink. It was heavy on the page, as if written with a deliberate hand, full of restraint and purpose. This wasn't a sentimental letter. It was a warning. Gloria had always seen the cracks in the Carter family that no one else wanted to acknowledge. She had once whispered to me, after one of Tyler's many collapses, "Your parents don't just enable him, darling. They depend on him to stay broken, otherwise they'd have to face themselves." At the time, I didn't understand. Now, I did. Entirely. I opened my laptop and plugged in the flash drive. A folder popped up. Trust revisions final. There were PDFs of her last 3 amendments to her will, each increasingly explicit about my role and the limitations on my parents and brother. She'd stripped their access layer by layer, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. Another file, a voice memo. I hesitated, then pressed play. Gloria's voice, faint, raspy, but still razor sharp. "Madison, if this is in your hands, they've likely tried to turn you against yourself. Don't let them. You were never cold, you were clear, and clarity frightens people who thrive on confusion. Don't let their panic become your guilt." My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out a legal pad from her desk drawer and began taking notes. Names, dates, instructions. She'd done most of the groundwork. Now it was on me to finish it. When I returned to Chicago that night, I didn't go home. I went straight to Calvin Winter's office. He'd been Gloria's estate attorney for 30 years, and he was one of the few people I trusted implicitly. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, more brittle, but his eyes were the same, sharp as broken glass. "I've been expecting this," he said, standing as I walked in. "They've been sniffing around." I raised a brow. "How bad?" He handed me a file. "Donald requested copies of all account statements and property deeds last week, claimed you'd authorized it, which I didn't, which is why I stalled." He folded his hands, "But I suspect they're not done trying." I nodded. "Neither am I." When I stepped back into my apartment that night, the city lights had already washed across my windows like tired ghosts. I dropped my coat, set the flash drive carefully on my kitchen counter, and sank into the silence. But it didn't last long. My phone vibrated. Patricia. I stared at the name glowing on the screen. A year ago, I would have answered without thinking. Out of habit, out of the frayed remnants of daughterly obligation. But tonight, I just let it ring until it stopped. 30 seconds later, a text came through. Please call us. We're worried. Mom. Worried. That word felt like a costume she had put on last minute, ill-fitting and borrowed. If they were really worried, it wasn't for me. It was for the estate, for what I might do with the knowledge Gloria left behind. I opened the second letter in the bundle. They will rewrite history, Madison. That is their talent. They will tell stories so often that even you might begin to doubt the truth. Do not let them gaslight you into surrendering what is rightfully yours, what is rightfully just. Gloria had known Patricia and Donald too well. The next morning I met Zoe at a corner cafe near Fulton Market. She was already there, nursing an Americano and scribbling into her moleskin like always. God, you look like you haven't slept in a week, she said, eyes narrowing the second I sat down. I haven't, I said, sliding her the flash drive. I need you to pull everything you can from this. Metadata, timestamps, anything that's been edited or suppressed. Zoe was a digital archivist for a private history foundation, and more importantly, my closest friend since undergrad. If anyone could make sense of what Gloria had left behind, it was her. She turned the flash drive in her hand. What's on it? Revisions to Gloria's trust, and recordings, possibly more than just personal notes. Zoe raised a brow. You think she knew she'd be sabotaged? I think she planned for it. She nodded. Give me 24 hours. I stood to leave, but paused. Zoe? Yeah? If anything happens, if I get locked out of my accounts, or if someone tries to claim I'm not of sound mind, there's a file labeled Backup A. Her eyes flicked up, suddenly sober. Jesus, Madison. Are we playing that kind of game? We've always been playing that kind of game, I said, walking away. Later that afternoon, I received a formal letter from Donald's legal team. They were requesting an emergency review of Gloria's estate distribution, citing potential undue influence and concerns over Madison Carter's recent behavior. A classic move, projecting their own manipulations onto me. Attached was a statement of concern, signed by both Donald and Patricia. I read it twice. The phrasing was designed to raise doubt, distanced from family, emotional instability following Gloria's passing, unusual secrecy regarding financial matters. They were trying to frame me as unstable, volatile, unfit to control the trust they had underestimated me. Again, I forwarded the document to Calvin with a single line. Initiate preemptive motion. We're not letting this go uncontested. That night, I returned to my grandmother's voice. I played the second audio file, which began with static and then her whisper. They'll say it's about money, Madison. It never was. It was always about control. You were the only one I ever trusted to break the cycle. And that was when it hit me. Not just what I was fighting for, but what I had already inherited. Not just property or power, but purpose. Gloria hadn't just left me instructions. She left me a map, and it was time I started following it. The air inside Holloway and Wexler Law felt colder than the streets outside, as though the walls had absorbed decades of betrayal, secrets, and contested fortunes. I stepped through the glass doors, heels tapping against polished marble, and nodded to the receptionist, who barely looked up from her screen. This was not new for me. I had walked into countless corporate buildings as an architect, a professional, but today I wasn't Madison Carter the designer. I was Madison Carter the inheritor. Or so I hoped. The conference room was dimly lit and painfully sterile, all mahogany trim and leather chairs too stiff to sit in comfortably. I was the first to arrive, but not for long. The door creaked open behind me and Patricia walked in like she owned the building. Beside her was Donald, his expression carefully neutral, though the tick in his left eye betrayed the tension he couldn't quite mask. Tyler came next, late as usual, sauntering in with the arrogance of someone who still thought charm could erase a lifetime of failure. None of them spoke to me, not even a glance. Calvin entered last with a leather portfolio in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice brisk, businesslike. "We're here to begin the formal reading of Gloria Whitmore's last will and testament per her final directive. Please have a seat." We settled into our respective chairs, the silence sharp enough to slice through. Calvin tapped a few times on the tablet, then pressed play on a pre-recorded video. The screen flickered. There she was. Gloria. She looked pale, her voice raspy but deliberate. "If you're watching this, it means I've finally left this world behind. And if you're all in this room together, well, then the fireworks are just about to begin." Patricia let out a soft scoff, folding her arms. Gloria continued, "Let's be clear. I know the kind of people I raised, or tried to. I know who showed up when it counted, and who vanished the moment it got inconvenient. I'm not interested in polite lies. So here it is, my estate, my choice." Donald shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm leaving the majority of my estate, including the Vermont property, my shares in Whitmore Holdings, and the contents of my private vault, to my granddaughter, Madison Carter." Patricia's jaw clenched. Tyler let out a soft, incredulous laugh, as though the idea itself were a punchline. Gloria's voice grew sharper. "You may question this, you may challenge it, but you all know deep down why. Madison was the only one who came back, not for money, not for status, but for me." The screen went black. Calvin cleared his throat, then added, "There are additional stipulations. Madison will be given control of the estate within 90 days, barring any legal contestation." "Oh, there will be contestation," Patricia hissed, her voice low and poisonous. "Be my guest," I replied, meeting her stare without flinching. "You'll only prove her right." Tyler stood abruptly. "This is a joke, right? You're going to let the family black sheep walk off with everything?" "No," Calvin said calmly. "Gloria already did." The tension in the room curdled into something dense and heavy. For once, Donald said nothing. His silence was not resignation. It was calculation. As they all filed out of the room one by one, Calvin placed a sealed envelope in front of me. "This wasn't part of the official will. She wanted you to have it privately." I took the envelope with both hands. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, a single sentence handwritten in Gloria's fading cursive: "Trust no one, not even those who cry at your side." The temperature dropped several degrees in my chest. I folded the note, tucked it into my coat pocket, and walked out, leaving the smell of old money and fresh betrayal behind me. The moment I stepped outside, the chill of the late afternoon wind sliced through my coat, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was the echo of Gloria's voice, still ringing in my ears. "Trust no one." That line played over and over in my mind as I walked down Madison Avenue, eyes half focused on the blur of traffic and pedestrian. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't over. That reading had just lit the fuse. The firestorm was coming. Back at the hotel, I placed the envelope on the desk like it might detonate. I had no doubt Gloria left more breadcrumbs. That single sentence was never meant to stand alone. I scanned the envelope again, this time noticing a faint indentation on the inner flap. Carefully, I held it against the desk lamp. A second piece of folded paper had been tucked behind the lining. I eased it out with tweezers from my makeup kit. It was a photocopy of an old letter. Dated nearly 25 years ago, the handwriting wasn't Gloria's, it was my mother's. "Gloria, I'm writing this because I don't know who else to turn to. Madison isn't safe with Patricia. She lied about the birth certificate. She knows Donald isn't the father. I'm going to tell the truth. But if something happens to me, promise me you'll protect her." My heart stopped. My knees gave out beneath me, and I caught the edge of the bed just in time. I'd spent my life wondering why I never fit, why the smiles in childhood photos never reached anyone's eyes but mine. And now the truth was unraveling faster than I could brace for it. Donald wasn't my father. That would explain the icy distance, the disgust masked as discipline, the years of being dismissed like an afterthought. Patricia, on the other hand, she had always wielded her control like a weapon. Her love, if one could call it that, had conditions written in invisible ink: obey, disappear, never ask. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling, and dialed the one person I had promised myself I wouldn't contact. Eli Parker, investigative journalist, former flame, the only one who ever made me feel seen, and the only one I'd pushed away the minute my family burned the bridge behind me. He picked up on the second ring. "Madison?" His voice was tentative, surprised. "I need your help," I said. "And I know I don't deserve it, but I have a name, a document, and a lie 25 years old." There was a pause on the line, then a quiet exhale. "Tell me everything." We met that night at a small bar in the East Village. Dim lighting, bourbon-stained tables, and a jukebox that hadn't worked since 2010. Eli was the same. Sharper, maybe, leaner around the edges, but the eyes hadn't changed. He listened as I laid out the will, the note, the letter, and when I finished, he leaned back and said just one word: DNA. I nodded slowly. I already booked the test. I took the sample from Gloria's hairbrush, sealed and stored. "And your own?" "Ready." He scribbled in his notebook, still that same old-school method I used to tease him for. If Patricia really forged the birth certificate, then someone helped her. These things don't happen in a vacuum. You're thinking hospital records? I'm thinking we start with the nurse who signed the discharge papers, then cross-reference with the notary on your birth certificate. If there's a trail, we'll find it. I watched him across the table. The fire in his eyes had returned, not for me, not yet, but for the story, and that was enough. Back at the hotel, I stared out the window at the city lights. Somewhere beneath the glittering skyline, my past had been buried like a time bomb. But it wasn't just mine anymore. It was my mother's truth, Gloria's final wish, and perhaps the beginning of something I hadn't dared to hope for. Justice. The phone buzzed beside me, a known number. "You shouldn't have come back." I didn't flinch. I smiled. Let them come. I wasn't afraid of ghosts anymore. The estate felt different this time. The air was heavier, denser, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for secrets to scream. When I stepped into the marble foyer of the Carter residence in Vermont, a flood of memories surged at me like cold water. The echo of heels clicking on tile, Patricia's voice slicing through the silence like a whip, the way Donald never looked up from his paper. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Tyler was the one who answered the door. He didn't smile, just looked at me like I'd tracked mud over a white carpet. "Didn't expect you to show," he muttered. "Didn't expect Gloria to die, yet here we are," I replied coolly, brushing past him. The hallway seemed darker than I remembered, or maybe it was just me, older now, seeing shadows I used to ignore. Framed portraits lined the corridor, stoic faces in oil paint, the Carter legacy in full display. Donald in his prime, Patricia with her pearls and false grace, Tyler in his prep school uniform, smiling like he had a future worth rooting for. And then, buried at the end, one photo of me, 10 years old, barely visible in the far corner of the family portrait, cropped, distant. "Patricia wants to see you in the sunroom," Tyler said flatly and disappeared. The sunroom. That ironic little name for a place where nothing ever felt warm. I walked down the hallway slowly, hand trailing over the banister, my heels muffled on the rug. The closer I got, the more I heard it. Voices. Heated, hushed, biting. She's digging where she shouldn't. If that girl drags Gloria's name into scandal, the whole family suffers. Patricia snapped. She already has something. Donald's voice responded, lower, gruffer. That envelope wasn't empty. Gloria left her more than money. I paused, heart pounding. The door was ajar just enough to see them. Patricia pacing, clutching a wine glass like a weapon. Donald slouched in the chair, older than I remembered, but still too cold to be weak. "She has Ely on her side now," Patricia hissed. "That reporter, the one she used to sleep with, he's not just a fling. He's dangerous. He has reach. She's bluffing." "She's not." Patricia's voice lowered to a snarl. "And if she gets that DNA test result, we lose everything." I stepped through the doorway before they could say another word. "Well, that's one way to make a girl feel welcome," I said, arms folded. Both heads snapped toward me. Patricia recovered first, slipping into her usual mask of gracious venom. "Madison, we were just talking about you." I gathered. Good to know my personal affairs are still the family hobby. Donald stood slowly, expression unreadable. "What do you want?" "I want what I'm owed," I said, "and you both know that goes beyond Gloria's will." There was a long silence. Patricia sipped her wine. Donald's jaw clenched. "I don't care what Gloria told you," Patricia said. "She was a bitter woman with a penchant for drama. She didn't understand how this family works." "No," I said. "She understood too well. She just stopped playing your game." I turned to leave, but Patricia's voice chased me down the hall. "Madison, be careful. Digging up graves often leads to your own." I didn't stop, didn't turn around. But inside, my pulse drummed like war drums. She was nervous. And that meant I was close. Later that evening, I descended into the basement, the one place no Carter ever spoke of. It had been padlocked for years, but Gloria had left the key in a hollowed-out Bible in her study, as if she knew I'd return for the truth. I clicked on the flashlight. Dust floated like specters in the beam, old boxes, broken furniture, and there, under a faded cloth, a trunk. Inside were Gloria's journals, and buried within them, a hospital discharge form dated 2 days after my birth, but the name listed under Mother wasn't Patricia, it was Ann Whitaker, and I had no idea who she was. The name haunted me. Ann Whitaker. It rolled off my tongue like a question half whispered in a dream. I stared at the yellowing discharge form again, checking and rechecking the details. My birth date, the hospital in Montpelier, but under Mother's name it was Ann, not Patricia Carter. Not the woman who raised me with clipped smiles and expectations that weighed more than steel. This wasn't a clerical error. This was truth, buried beneath decades of silence. I stayed in the basement until midnight, flipping through Gloria's journals, the pages inked with her tight, almost obsessive handwriting. She didn't say it outright, she never did, but between the lines of anecdotes, rants, and whispered regret, a picture began to form. Anne was someone from their past, someone they needed to erase, and I was the last trace of her. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, startling me. A message from Eli. "Heard from my source at St. James Memorial, that name you gave me. Ann Whitaker. She was admitted to the psych ward in 1993, discharged 6 months later, disappeared." I stared at the message, my throat tightening. The year matched. It was the same year I turned 1. Back upstairs, the house creaked like it was alive. I crept through the hallway toward Gloria's old study. My key clicked softly into the lock. Inside, the room was untouched, the lingering scent of lilac and old books making the air thick. I needed something solid, a signature. a photograph, anything that would link Ann Whitaker to the Carters. And then I saw it, tucked into a locked drawer at the back of the desk. The lock was flimsy. A swift pull with a letter opener snapped it open. Inside, a leather-bound photo album. I turned each page with trembling fingers. There, wedged between vacation pictures in Italy and charity events in Boston, was a candid photo, grainy, poorly lit, but unmistakable. A young woman with dark hair and wide, terrified eyes stood beside Donald Carter, both dressed in hospital scrubs. Donald's arm rested protectively around her shoulder, but she looked trapped. I flipped the photo over, in glorious handwriting, Ann and D, before they made her disappear. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about erasure, about a woman discarded like a secret, about a child, me, given a new origin story to preserve the Carter name. The floor creaked behind me. I turned sharply. Tyler stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, voice low. "Neither should you," I snapped. "But we're all trespassers in this house, aren't we?" His jaw tightened. I saw the light under the door, thought it might be you. "You mean hoped it wasn't?" He hesitated. "What are you really looking for, Madison? The truth." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You won't find peace here." "Peace isn't what I came for," I said, "but I will take justice." His gaze flicked to the album in my hands. For a second, just one, I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not guilt, something sadder, recognition. "She wasn't crazy," he murmured. "That's what they said about her, Ann. But she wasn't." I froze. "You knew her?" "I was 5. I barely remember. But I remember the screaming. I remember Mom, Patricia, locking the bedroom door, and Dad whispering things like it's handled, like Ann was a problem to be cleaned up. My chest ached with fury and grief, tangled beyond separation. Tyler looked down. "They said you were Patricia's. Always did. But she never held you once, not really." I stepped closer. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you already know what happens when you get too close to the truth in this family." I nodded slowly, gripping the photo album tighter. "I'm not afraid of them anymore," I said. "You should be," he whispered. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I left the study with the photo album clutched to my chest, and a resolve crystallizing in my bones. Tomorrow I'd see Eli. We would run the test, Gloria's journals, the photo, the hospital records. It was enough. Enough to rip the Carter legacy apart. One truth at a time. The DNA results arrived in a plain manila envelope, the kind you'd expect a tax form to come in. Not a revelation that could unravel the very fabric of a family. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter of my temporary rental in Burlington, Vermont, while the kettle hissed and whistled, steam curling toward the ceiling like a warning. Eli arrived 15 minutes later, his breath clouding in the cold air as he stepped in. "You opened it?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He gave me a long look, then set his briefcase down and joined me at the table. "You want me to?" "No," I said, reaching for the envelope. "If I've come this far, I'm not going to flinch now." I tore it open slowly, my hands careful, as if the truth inside might shatter. The paper was warm from the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, the ink crisp and clinical. Paternity analysis result. Subject A, Madison Carter, alleged father, Donald Carter. Result, 0% probability of paternity. There it was. Black and white. A name that had always been a prison to me, no longer had any biological claim. I laughed, a strange, bitter sound. "He's not my father." Eli read the line again. No, he's not. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, a strange calm spread through me like cool water. He raised me, I said, or pretended to. Gave me rules, expectations, but never love. And now I know why. Eli placed a gentle hand over mine. You always said something felt off. I knew I didn't belong, I whispered. They made sure I knew it every day. Outside, the late October wind rattled window panes. Vermont was already dressing itself for winter. And I, somehow, felt stripped clean. That night, I printed copies of the DNA report. I tucked one inside the Carter family Bible, still kept in the study of the estate. Another I slipped into the ledger of financial holdings Donald guarded like scripture. And the third, I hand-delivered to Patricia's private office at the law firm, slipping it under the door with a note. You lied. I found the proof. We both know what happens next, Madison. It was more than a warning. It was a declaration. This was no longer about uncovering my identity. This was about making them look at what they'd buried. Later that evening, I visited the cemetery outside Montpelier. The gravestone read, Ann Whitaker, 1971 to 1996. Beloved daughter, may her soul know peace. I stood there with a single white rose in hand. Was biological mother, gone before I had the chance to ask anything, but I felt her, like an echo in the trees, in the silence between gusts of wind. I found you, I whispered. They tried to erase you, but I found you. I placed the rose at the base of the headstone, brushing away the fallen leaves. And then I walked away, because this wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about confront, and the storm was only just beginning. The next morning I returned to the Carter estate, not through the front gates with their wrought iron flourish and polished brass plaque, but through the side path behind the garden shed. It was the same path I used to sneak through when I was a teenager, after curfew, when I wanted to disappear. Only this time, I wasn't sneaking in to hide. I was bringing truth with me. Donald was in the sunroom, a place he never allowed anyone to interrupt him before noon. But this wasn't a request. I stepped through the sliding doors, the DNA folder in hand, and laid it flat on the table where his morning paper usually sat. He looked up slowly, his expression more annoyed than surprised. What's this intrusion? I pulled out the chair across from him and sat. It's you finally getting what you deserve. His eyes dropped to the page. He scanned the lines, his face pale beneath his carefully manicured beard. Where did you get this? From a lab in Chicago. Independent, verified, retested. He didn't blink. So you've lied to me my entire life. You let me believe I was your daughter while treating me like a burden. Now I know why. He stood, his shadow cutting across the table. It doesn't change anything. I raised you, I fed you, you wore our name. You used me, I said, my voice low but steady. And when I asked questions, you punished me. When I needed truth, you gave me silence. He took a deep breath, calculating. What do you want, Madison? Money? An apology? I stared at him. I want you to acknowledge what you did. I want you to admit that I was never your daughter and that you knew it. I want the truth to stop hiding behind your bank accounts and your lawyers. He scoffed. And if I don't? I smiled, cold and clean. Then I go public. The DNA report goes to the press, to the board of your company, to the partners at your firm, to the bar association. You want to gamble your legacy on silence? Go ahead. There was a flicker of panic then, barely visible, but I saw it. He wasn't scared of me. He was scared of what people would think when they saw that the Carter empire was built on hypocrisy. He sat down slowly, hands trembling as they folded over the edge of the table. I never meant for her to die, he murmured. What? My throat closed. Anne, Your mother. She was supposed to leave town, not disappear. My breath froze in my chest. What did you do to her? His silence was answer enough. I rose. You're going to tell the truth, or I will. And I walked out, the weight of decades finally beginning to lift off my shoulders. That afternoon, I met Eli at the courthouse steps. I handed him a sealed envelope. Motion to petition the probate court. I'm challenging Donald Carter's guardianship over the estate filed in my name when I was 17. He nodded, reading the front. You're ready? No, I said, but I'm not hiding anymore. We walked up the marble stairs together, twin reflections framed in courthouse glass. Truth on one side, betrayal on the other. And for the first time in years, I knew which side I was standing on. Inside, the gavel would soon fall, but outside, I had already won something greater. My name, my bloodline, and the power to decide what came next. The courtroom was carved from old stone, its columns looming like watchful sentinels. Madison sat at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped, knuckles pale. Light streamed through narrow windows, painting stripes across her gray blouse. The same one she wore the day she left Burlington for good, but this time, she wasn't fleeing. She was returning to reclaim. Across the aisle, Donald sat stiffly beside his lawyer, his expression carved in granite. No arrogance now, just calculation. Beside him, Veronica avoided eye contact, her lips tight. Amber wasn't there. She hadn't shown up since the DNA results surfaced, since the family group chat had imploded under the weight of Madison's truth bomb. Judge Morales entered without fanfare. She was sharp-eyed, quick-tongued, and had a reputation for slicing through theatrics like a scalpel. Madison had requested her. Eli had made sure of that. Ms. Carter, the judge began, reviewing the file. You're petitioning to reverse guardianship assignments made in your name as a minor and contest the validity of the trust fund transferred under Carter Enterprises. Do I have that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Eli stood, calm and clear. And we will also be presenting evidence suggesting fraudulent misrepresentation of parental identity, as well as concealment of the decedent and Carter's final testament. Madison didn't flinch. She had memorized every word of Anne's final letter, the one hidden behind a false panel in her old bedroom's closet. In shaky handwriting, Anne had confessed the affair, the threat Donald had made, and how she feared for Madison's safety. It wasn't notarized, but it was enough to cast a shadow over everything. Donald's attorney objected. Speculation, handwritten, unsigned, no verification of authenticity. But Madison stood up. My mother's voice is real, and that document is more truth than anything this family has offered me in 20 years. The courtroom stilled. Even the murmurs faded. Judge Morales gestured for her to continue. You may proceed, Ms. Carter. I was 17 when Donald Carter stripped me of access to everything. My mother's accounts, the house she promised me, the trust that was set aside in her will. He told me I didn't deserve it, that I was a stain on this family's name. Now I know why, because I wasn't his, and because he feared what I might uncover. She held up a copy of the DNA report. This proves he's not my biological father. But that's not the core issue. The core is what he did to erase my identity, to rewrite my story, and to protect a lie. Donald finally spoke, his voice graveled with age and arrogance. You think this will change anything, Madison? I gave you our name. You were nothing without it. I was nothing because of it, she said. A hush swept through the gallery. Eli stepped in with final exhibits. Anne's will, Anne's medical files marked confidential, a deleted email thread between Veronica and Donald that Madison had recovered from an encrypted drive. It was enough to stall the proceedings, enough to shake foundations. The judge didn't rule that day. She needed to review, to weigh, to verify. But as Madison exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed the steps, microphones, cameras, questions. She didn't answer them. Instead, she turned to Ellie and whispered, "I don't need a verdict to know I was right." He nodded. Behind them, the courthouse doors shut. Inside, justice would take its time, but Madison had already reclaimed something far greater than a ruling. Her voice, her history, and her power to write the ending herself. Madison stood at the edge of Lake Champlain, the wind catching the ends of her coat as the water whispered against the rocks. Behind her, the courthouse lights were barely visible. In front of her, Burlington's vast horizon stretched in silence. She clutched a small folded piece of paper. Anne's original will now entered into the court record, but more than that. A letter from a mother to her daughter. The kind of love Madison had stopped believing she deserved until she saw Anne's words, her fear, her guilt, her truth. She unfolded it one last time and read the final line again. "Forgive me for being too weak to protect you, but never forget you are stronger than any lie they told." A car pulled up behind her. Eli stepped out, his hands shoved into the pockets of his overcoat. "You know you don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. Madison didn't turn. "I've been alone long enough to know when I'm not anymore." He didn't push further, just stood beside her, both of them staring into the shifting night. "I'm not sure the court will grant everything we asked for," she said. "They don't have to. What matters most is already on record. The truth exists now, where it can't be buried again." She smiled faintly. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel rage, triumph, but it's not that. It's stillness." Closure has its own kind of silence. They stood that way for a long time, until she finally turned and handed him a thumb drive. "There's something else," she said. "It's a voicemail from Gloria." Eli arched an eyebrow. "The housekeeper?" "More than that, she was the only one who knew the whole story. She kept quiet because Donald paid her daughter's hospital bills. But she left this for me, right before she moved to Arizona." He took the drive and tucked it into his coat. "We'll file it under supplemental evidence." Madison stepped back, watching the waves. "Let them keep the house, the name, even the trust. I don't care anymore. I walked into that courtroom as Madison Carter, but I'm leaving it as Madison Whitfield, my mother's name." Eli paused. "You want to change your legal name?" She nodded. "Carter was always a lie. Whitfield was who she was before him. It's who I want to be after." The wind picked up, carrying with it the last echoes of her past. 2 weeks later, the ruling arrived. The judge granted partial restitution, reopening the inheritance review, granting Madison legal access to the original trust's remaining assets, and launching a formal investigation into forged documents filed by Donald's legal team. It wasn't a full victory, but it was enough. The local paper ran the headline, "Daughter's Battle for Truth Uncovers Family Fraud." But Madison never read the article. She was already gone. She sold everything she owned that tied her to Burlington and moved west, settling in a small town in Oregon near the coast. She joined a nonprofit advocating for survivors of family manipulation and abuse. No interviews, no social media, just quiet days filled with purpose. One day, a letter arrived. No return address, just the initials AC inside. She opened it slowly. Inside, a single sentence in careful cursive, "You changed the story for all of us who couldn't." Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from knowing she wasn't the only one, that she had broken a silence that had choked generations. At sunset, she stood at the cliffs, phone in hand. She recorded a voice memo. "To anyone who's ever been told their voice doesn't matter, it does. And even if no one listens right away, speak anyway. The silence was never yours to keep." Then she pressed save and walked forward, into the wind, into her future, into a life that no one could steal again. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through silence, betrayal, and ultimate truth. The Reclamation is more than just a story. It's a reminder that even when the world tries to erase you, your voice still matters. To those who've ever been gaslighted by the people they called family, to those who had to walk away just to survive, to those who are quietly rebuilding after the storm, this story is for you. We hope Madison's journey gave you more than closure. We hope it gave you courage. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to know. Blood doesn't define loyalty, and truth always finds its way home. Until the next story, stay strong, stay seen, and never stop reclaiming your voice.